Good evening. This is Picture This, your live call-in photography talk show. And good evening, Jeff.
Hey, Lou. How you doing?
We're doing well.
Good, good. We've got some fun things to talk about this evening. We got some numbers and things to hand out. If you're in Pinellas County, give us a call, 727-441-3000. Toll free, we're at 866-826-1340. And you can catch the stream if you go to the tantalk1340.com website. That's tantalk1340.com. You'll be able to click on the streaming link in the upper left-hand corner and get to us. You can also email questions to us at picturethis.questions, make sure it's plural, at gmail.com. We take all questions. You'll get real answers. So how have you been this week?
Been pretty good. Had a good week.
Good. Do anything exciting?
We were up in Orlando.
Oh, yeah?
Did a little bit of photography at concerts at Epcot.
Yeah.
Of an old rock and roll band known as the Turtles.
The Turtles. Jeez.
Flo and Eddie.
Yeah, I've heard of them. A little before my time, but, well, what can I say? But, yeah, that was probably interesting. Did you take some pictures?
Yes, I absolutely did. Used the little point and shoot, which I typically do for that.
Yeah.
And had a really great time. Ended up, one of the sets that they did ended up in the front row, which makes it really nice.
Yeah.
For photography.
And speaking of point and shoots, we're actually going to be talking about compact cameras, point and shoots. Tonight's show is dedicated to looking at some of the latest and greatest cameras that are out there, the point and shoots, the interchangeable lens cameras, what we sometimes call bridge cameras. They look like the interchangeable lens ones, but you can't take the lens off. Bigger cameras, but maybe a little less versatile, but more compact, some cool things. We've got This Week in Photography coming up. I'm going to lead with that in a minute. You've got our website of the week, so let's dig in, see what we got going on. And this will be right up your alley for somebody your age. You probably remember all of these events. This was actually 61 years ago today. 61 years ago. I'll bet you were born then, weren't you?
I was alive.
Wow.
I don't think I could talk yet, though.
Oh, well, that could be. Marilyn Monroe appeared on her very first Life magazine cover 61 years ago today. And there's two interesting things that struck me about this cover. One is there's a little explanation, a little title that says Marilyn Monroe, the Talk of Hollywood. And she had done a couple of small bit roles in some movies. But the month before, in March of 1952, the first nude photographs of hers had been published, and not just Hollywood was talking about her, but the entire United States was. She went on that same year to have her first starring role in a film, and the rest is history. But unfortunately, in just a little over 10 years from then, she would be dead from a barbiturate overdose. So the other interesting part of it, though, is up in the upper right-hand corner of the magazine cover. It says, "There is a case for interplanetary saucers."
Oh, wow.
So, you know, if Life magazine published it, it must be true. I think those Martians were coming over back then. So, but maybe you could enlighten me on that. I don't know. Before my time. So, 61 years ago, Marilyn Monroe, 61 years ago to the day, Marilyn Monroe first appeared on her first cover of Life magazine. I think she went on to appear about 6 to 10 more times. Quite a celebrity during that time. Yeah, for the next 10 years. Quite an accomplishment, so to speak. So, what do you have for us for the website of the week?
Continuing along, as I have pretty regularly with a British photographer.
Yeah.
The website is Justin, Justin, Mins, MINS, .co.uk.
Another UK guy.
Yep. He lives in East Anglia, which is the eastern coast of England.
Yeah.
And does a lot of seascapes.
Right.
Several hundred images in the gallery.
Wow.
I just was fascinated by the seascapes. He also does a lot of outdoor landscape photography, and some of that I was very inspired by as well, but particularly the seascapes I thought were fantastic.
Sounds exciting. I'll have to check that out this week. You know, we got something coming up with the Florida Center for Creative Photography this week, and I'm going to spring this on you. I didn't let you prepare.
Oh.
But starting, I believe it's tomorrow, we have our first, let me double check that on the calendar. I don't want to mislead anybody. But I have gone out and created our very first, it's tomorrow, the 8th. Starts at 7 p.m. People will have a week to do it. I have created a 25-question photography quiz for people. 25 questions, 4 points apiece, total of 100 points. And just to put it in perspective, I gave this test to Teresa, who knows a lot of this material real well, being married to me. That's probably unfortunate for her, but she only scored a 64 out of 100. But everything on this quiz is covered in our beginning photography boot camp.
Yep.
So if you think you're at the top of your game, you're beyond the beginning photographer, we've got a quiz for you. And even if you are a beginner, we've got a couple of prizes going on. We're going to give away a FCCP supporter membership. We're going to give away a free workshop. And I've got about 4 or 5 books that Peach Pit Press and maybe Amp Photo and some of those have given me that I'm going to give away some books to help people learn some of this. But I've got a sample question for you. And let me just pull one up here. Beginning photography. Beginning photography. This is question number 12.
Okay.
Landscape photos usually have a large amount of what? And this is a multiple choice. Landscape photos usually have a large amount of what? Rocks and trees, sky, earth, wind, and fire. You being a rock guy, I thought you might have got a chuckle out of that one. Or depth of field.
Well, they usually have a large amount of depth of field.
That would be correct. Where's our buzzer there? We'll have to ring the buzzer. Lou got a free one there. All right. So you see, we got 25 questions for folks to take starting tomorrow. They have a week to take the quiz if they want. It's all online. So if anyone's interested, head over to our website, www.FL as in Florida, CCP, centercreativephotography.org. You can get signed up to take the quiz, win a few prizes, and have some fun, and see what you really know about photography, because all of this stuff is covered in our beginning photography not web class, but workshop. Yeah. All right.
That was not rehearsed. I'm glad I got it right.
Well, I am shocked you didn't go with the earth, wind, and fire answer, to tell you the truth. Being the old rocker that you are, I'm sure you remember earth, wind, and fire.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Probably had your disco suit on when you listened to that stuff.
Right.
So let's switch gears a little bit and see if we can't tell some of the listeners about our top picks for new cameras. Mm-hmm. So what do you want to start? Well, let's start with the compacts, the small, pocketable ones. They fit in a purse, fit in a jacket or shirt pocket in most cases. But that's certainly a distinguishing characteristic, their compact size. What do you lead off your list with?
Well, one of the coolest new cameras that I have noticed in the past few months is the Pentax Optio WG2, and they've now announced a WG3.
Right.
Those are really cool little cameras. They're a 16-megapixel camera.
Right.
Got a zoom lens about 25 to 100.
Right.
They are waterproof down to 45 feet.
That's pretty cool.
They are drop-proof from about 7 feet.
Cool.
They're crush-proof to around 200 pounds. And they're back pocket-proof. They don't bend if you sit on it.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
And the thing that started to really attract me to it is a lot of these little point-and-shoots, one of their real strong points is the ability to take macro shots.
Oh, yeah.
They close focus, really easy. You get really close to your subject when you do that, though.
Sure.
And the problem becomes the camera and the lens shadow the flash, so you have no ability to add light to the subject. And this camera has a series of LEDs around the lens to act like a ring flash and add light to the subject.
Yeah, that's a real cool feature. You know, I really hadn't followed Pentax a lot when I was selling cameras back in Cincinnati. Not Ritz Camera, but some of the independents I worked for. We were strong Pentax dealers.
Oh, yeah.
Sold a lot of Pentax because they were a good brand.
Yep.
And they just didn't have the name recognition and the marketing clout that, well, certainly Minolta at that time, but Canon and Nikon, yeah. And so it's unfortunate. But, you know, Pentax is still kicking around out there, and they really do produce some fine cameras. And I've always been a big fan of weatherproof/waterproof cameras.
Yep.
Because I would say, you know, the two things that happen most to cameras, why they quit working, usually it's one of two. One, you dropped them, and that's a user error. Sorry about your luck. Fell out of your hand. Your kid did this, whatever. But it got dropped. That's not a manufacturer's defect. And the second being, you spilled something on it, or you dropped it in the water, and this or that. When you can protect out of those two things, you know, that camera's probably going to survive a long time. And we certainly saw that back in the 80s, the 90s, you know, several decades of Pentax producing some weatherproof/waterproof cameras.
Well, I think it was the W90.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s. It was kind of a brick.
That was a tank.
It was one of the first waterproof, you know, carried around cameras that really, you know, took great images, had a nice lens, and this is kind of a 21st century W90, except now it's small. It's not a brick.
Yeah. That old 90, that thing was a tank. Lots of luck getting that in a pocket. But it started another trend, and we're seeing the evolution of this camera into the new Pentax. I think that's a really cool camera. Any idea on the price range of that one? No,
I don't know. I honestly didn't look up to see what the price range is.
We'll have to look that up sometime. But that's cool. I'm going to lead off, not necessarily with my top pick in this category, but this is another product that's matured over several different models. It's the Canon PowerShot S110. And it's a pretty cool camera. I like it because it's so small, but to get that compact size, they did away with any optical finders. It's still using only a 12 megapixel chip, but it's a larger chip. It's almost, it's actually larger than a half-inch chip.
Yeah.
So it's a good-sized chip, which increases image quality over comparably sized cameras, and I think that's key. It also has a 24 to 120 zoom lens. That's a nice range. It has a fast aperture at the 24 millimeter. It's an f2 lens. However, when you zoom it out, because of the compact size, it drops down to like a 5.9 or f6, something like that. So it's a little slow in the telephoto range. But it has a cool little programmable dial on the top, so it's not as much menu-driven as some of the compacts. It's got some little more analog, tactile feel to it, which I really like, which you'll find out as we go on here. It's now got a multi-touch screen on the back of it, which I'm a big fan. We were talking about this before the show. You know, I've been an iPhone user since quite literally almost day one. I was working for Apple when it launched, and I really like the intuitiveness of a touch device, and the fact that they've added that to it, I think, is propelling it quite a bit. And the new one has Wi-Fi connectivity, which challenges. It keeps this thing viable in an iPhone, Android market, because one of the features of these kind of phones is you can instantly upload your pictures to Facebook, to Twitter, to Instagram. Now you've got a camera that's Wi-Fi capable, and Canon's not going to get shut out of that market like maybe some of the other manufacturers. They figured it out pretty quick. We had better start sticking Wi-Fi in all these devices if we want point-and-shoots compacts to, survive alongside a smartphone. So, cool camera.
Absolutely.
What else you got on your list?
Well, as far as point-and-shoots.
Yeah.
And I have found over the years, this is not a particular model as much as it is. I mentioned when I went to Orlando, I shot with a point-and-shoot, which is a Fuji 300 EXR.
Yeah.
And that's a small pocketable camera with a big zoom range.
Right.
That's lens is the 35 millimeter equivalent of 24 to 360.
Right. And
there are certainly much bigger cameras that go out to 1,000 or 1,200.
Sure.
But to put it in your pocket that goes to 360, and Fuji has those cameras in their EXR line.
Right.
And there's several of them depending on the price range and things like that you would be interested in. But the image quality is good, easy to use. The only lack, which is not unusual in point-and-shoots, like most point-and-shoots, it does not have an optical viewfinder, and it does not shoot RAW.
Right.
And that's a issue with all the point-and-shoots. The more serious you are, the more you'd rather it shot RAW, but they figure most of those are for walking around, and the JPEG will suffice and be easier for most people.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. It's. I think too many people now, in the early days of digital, RAW was this, quasi-format, had all this almost mysticism about it. Now people go, yeah, I understand RAW, and computers are fast enough to process it. You can, cards have gotten big enough, so RAW's become more commonplace. But I think JPEGs get downplayed a lot. I think you can take some wonderful pictures with JPEG. You may not be able to blow them up to a billboard, but how many people do that?
Well, and if you go back 10, 12 years, lots of photographers that were switching to digital because of the cost of memory and various issues like that. They were shooting weddings in JPEGs.
Very true. Very true. Got a question that came in via email. And this is from Nancy. So we can answer this one now. I'm going to throw this open to you. In keeping with the theme of this week's show, she writes, will you please explain when we're shopping for a point-and-shoot and we see something like, or the salesman tells us, it has a 30x optical or a 4x digital zoom in the description, what is this telling us? I just used those numbers as an example, she says. There are, of course, others. Some cameras will just say, for instance, 16x optical zoom and not mention a digital zoom at all. And so she goes on to talk a little bit about more things. But what is it with the numbers in the zooms? Can you tell the listeners what that's all about?
Sure.
All right.
If you had, for instance, with the zoom lens, you're going to have a low end, which is the lower number. And we're not going to talk about 35 millimeter equivalents because the math gets more difficult.
It does indeed.
So if we assume that the low wide angle was a 10 millimeter lens,
right,
and it's a 20 times zoom, it goes from 10 to 200.
Right.
And that needs to be translated into 35 millimeter. And I mentioned the one that I use, the Fuji, and that has a 15 times zoom.
Right.
And its range equivalent in 35 millimeters is 24 millimeters to 360.
Right.
And that's how the math works. It tells you the zoom range. And for most people, what it's really telling you is how much more telephoto are you going to get. So if it's a 10 times zoom, it probably doesn't have a whole lot of telephoto. You get out to 15, 20, 30 times, you're getting a lot of telephoto. The more telephoto you get, the more you need to make sure that there's image stabilization in the camera.
Right.
As far as digital zoom goes, digital zoom is kind of a misnomer. There's no zooming going on. It has nothing to do with the lens.
Right.
It really is just cropping in on the image in the camera. And the more you crop in, the more you throw away pixels or
Sure.
information, so you just end up using less pixels. It makes more sense, if you're going to try and do that, to do it in the computer and see what you're going to get.
Right. And a lot of times, doing it in the computer, the software, in a high-end computer can actually probably do a better job than
the camera.
in camera.
Right.
Yeah. So the key takeaways there are something, basically, we're always looking to quantify things into numbers. So the bigger the X zoom doesn't necessarily make it better, but it could be more versatile, meaning you can get closer to distant subjects. You're out at the zoo and there's all of the elephants are at the other side of the enclosure. You can zoom in more with your 20x, 30x. It's going to bring the object closer.
And of course, the issue is the more you zoom in, the more we all shake.
Right.
And the more you magnify the subject, the more you magnify your shake.
Right.
The more you zoom and the more powerful that zoom is, the harder it is to get a sharp photograph. Not because the camera can't do it, but because we can't hold it steady enough.
Yeah. And that leads into actually one of my picks. We'll go out of sequence here a little bit, but primarily because we're talking about this. One of my picks, and I've followed this class of cameras for quite a while, and it technically would probably qualify as what we call a bridge camera. It's bigger than a compact, but it doesn't have interchangeable lenses. But it's larger. It has high quality lenses. The bigger the lens, the more light they can generally gather, and there's just a number of features because physically it's larger, better battery life, just a number of things. But we looked this one up at last Wednesday's coffee at O'Keefe's. We talked about this, and Canon's been one of the leaders at this. And this is going to sound like I'm a Canon fanboy because here it is. I picked a couple of them, but this is the Canon PowerShot SX50.
Oh, yeah.
This has the 50x zoom lens, exactly the things we're talking about. It's the world's first 50x optical zoom compact camera. It's replaced their 40x camera that was out about a year before. It's a little lower megapixel, but with a zoom like that, that's not as critical as many people would seem. It only has a 12 megapixel sensor. But it does have a articulating screen, which when we looked at some of the competitors, like from Panasonic and some of the other ones, they had a fixed rear screen. And the articulating one allows you to flip it out. You can protect the screen a little better, but you can do some great high-angle shots, some great low-angle shots. And I would think that's key for somebody your age because you're just not able to get down on the ground the way you used to. You really need one of those articulated screens to get those, those bug's eye views, don't you?
I still get down on the ground.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, those grandkids and great-great-grandkids probably keep you in good shape. But that's a winner for me. The 35 millimeter equivalent is 24 millimeters to 1,200 millimeters. That's a phenomenal range. And I'm sure it. Canon used to make a 1,200 millimeter lens.
Oh yeah.
And I've actually seen that thing. It's almost 3 feet long.
Yeah.
I forget how many pounds it is, but you almost need two tripods to hold it.
Yeah.
And they were made to custom order. B&H had one for a while on their used shelf, and it was going for, get this, about $120,000.
Yep.
Yeah. So, it's kind of not that much of a deal. Let's see. This camera, I think we looked it up. It's like $425
Yep.
or $120,000. What am I going to spend to get to 1,200 millimeters? So unless you got a spare 120,000, and I mean B&H might have cut you a deal, but who knows? But unless you got a real chunk of change in your pocket, There's nothing else that's getting out like that. And as one of our members pointed out last Wednesday, people with this class of camera, not necessarily this particular one, but they were the ones that when they were I think they were in Central America shooting hummingbirds. It was pretty cool that these were the ones that were getting the shots.
They were getting the shots because they had
they would close focus,
yep.
And they could see a wider view and then zoom in on the hummingbirds and things like that. Whereas when you try and find something through a very small opening, it's challenging unless you do it all the time.
Yep.
Let's get our numbers out there again. If you've got a call or your question, rather, give us a call. In Pinellas County, we're 727-441-3000. But toll free, you can reach us at 866-826-1340, or shoot us your question at picturethis.questions with the S at gmail.com. So you got another camera for us?
Well, I would.
You had one camera on your list?
No, I've got other cameras.
Oh, okay.
They're probably and it's not really a point and shoot.
Well, that's okay.
But we talked a little bit about a mirrorless camera.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of the Olympus OMD M5.
Oh, yeah.
I even got that right. Why did they just call it an OMD?
I have no idea. That's what they certainly should have, but that's not Olympus's style of late.
But it's it has nothing to do with other than the fact that it looks pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like an old SLR, like it was drawn off of the old OM1s, OM2, Olympuses. Got a touch screen for some of the functions, including focusing.
Yeah, it does have some touchscreen functions, so I should be a fan.
And has interchangeable lenses. It's what's known as a mirrorless lens.
Right.
So it does not have an optical viewfinder.
Right.
It's an electronic viewfinder.
Yeah, effectively they're looking at a little tiny TV screen, a little LCD TV screen, but relatively high resolution.
Yes,
yeah.
Relatively high resolution, a good screen, high resolution on the back.
Yep.
Well, most people I've seen tend to use it with the screen as the viewfinder.
I would agree.
Interchangeable lenses, much like an SLR.
Yep.
And has a nice accessory battery pack.
Right.
That acts as kind of a grip, and then it really looks like something out of the 70s or 80s.
It does. We've got several members with that camera, and I've always been about cool looking cameras.
Yeah.
That's a certifiably cool looking camera. There's no doubt about that.
I know. And it's had all kinds of critical response and raves. Camera of the year for TIPA.
Yep.
Just a fantastic camera. It's the 4/3 system, which does limit you a little in your lens choices. You're going to be looking at certainly Olympus supports it.
Right.
Panasonic is in the 4/3 system, so there's some lenses.
Those are the two biggies.
Yeah.
Panasonic and Olympus that are really supporting that. Micro 4/3, all that.
Yeah.
Well, but the other thing that is cool about those that a lot of people seem to like is you can buy adapters and adapt all of these old still photography lenses to it. And you and I have gone round on this. I'm not a big fan of that because most of those old lenses, you know what? They're old lenses, and optical quality by what they are today, they're not as good. And, probably they've been through the mill, meaning the coatings may not, they may have some scratches, they got some dust, but it's certainly a way that if you've got a closet full of these old lenses, you can buy some adapters and get those old lenses onto a camera. And, but if that's your part of photography that you enjoy, go for it. Who am I to say that, you got to do everything with a new lens? if that's exciting to you and you like getting those old lenses out and testing one against the other, go for it. The Micro Four Thirds system will let you put just about anything off of the end of it.
Oh, yeah. And there are some great old lenses. That's another topic for another evening, perhaps, but there's some legendary lenses out there.
Yeah, like which camera manufacturer made glass that was radioactive? That ought to be a quiz for next week's show. Well, we were talking. We talked about how the OMD M5 or whatever it is in my opinion, a certifiably cool-looking camera. I had to have one of those on my compact list. And the camera that I picked is the Fujifilm X100S.
Yep.
And I'm not the only guy that's out there saying this is a really cool camera. It is the upgrade. It was announced in January at the I think it was Consumer Electronics Show in early January. It was pre-show announced. It's it is a replacement to the X100. So they updated it, but the X100 was a little quirky. They tried to fix some things with firmware and some things like that, and they really kind of modernized it. But the X100S is what the original one should have been. This is a stable camera, it seems. Wonderful product. It's not an interchangeable. It is in the compact system, but one of the things that really attracts me to this camera is it looks like an old Leica rangefinder.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful camera, and the price goes along with it. You were thinking it was over $1,000. I was thinking it was like $999 maybe.
Yeah.
I'll have to look what the street price is on it. It's 16 megapixel, uses an APS-C size chip. So for a compact camera, this isn't falling into that bigger chip.
Yep.
Range again, so that's a large sensor. It's got a 35 millimeter equivalent lens, but the lens does not come off. That helps contribute to the compact size and all of it. It is pretty cool. It does not have an articulated LCD on the back. It's a fixed LCD, which I would love to see them do that, but typically they've got to make them a little thicker when they do that and things. Shutter speeds from 30 seconds to a 4,000th of a second. It shoots video. Weight-wise, it's under a pound. So it feels good in your hand, but it's not the old, brass and metal Leica. It's not that heavy. You could wear it around your neck all day and, not really know it at the end of the day because it's not a killer camera weight-wise or anything. But that is a really cool camera. If anybody wants to buy me one for Christmas, you go right ahead. I'll be happy to accept it and say thanks. But that's got to make my list of compacts. And so, what I had on my compact list was the X100S, the S110. Boy, are manufacturers running out of names for these things?
Yeah, right.
Or what? Jeez.
That's because there's so many of them.
Yeah, that's for sure. You got another camera on one of yours?
Well, I would be kind of switching to SLRs.
Okay. All right. So we're going to be able to take the lens on and off.
I'm going to be able to take the lens on and off. We're going to be able to look through the viewfinder and through the miracles of a prism or mirrors. Right. We're going to be able to look out through the lens.
Woo, what a novel idea.
And I think a groundbreaker when it came out last year was the Nikon D800.
Oh, yeah.
And its sibling, the D800E.
Right.
Which brings up a particular question, the difference between the two.
Sure.
Which is the D800E does not have a low-pass filter.
Right.
And that's one of the first cameras to come out, probably the first in the smaller size of a 35-millimeter style camera.
Well, unless you wanted to buy a $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 Leica,
but it does not have a low-pass filter.
Right. And
they don't on the black and white one, I think.
Yeah. But, and the other name for a low-pass filter, which is the name I usually use because I think it starts to people can kind of figure out what it does. It's called an anti-alias filter.
Right.
So it helps with things like the potential for jaggies, or even more so, the potential for what we call a moire pattern, which is that shimmering kind of effect that
you see sometimes even on television.
Yeah, you used to in the old days of TV. You'd get the crazy weather guy with the plaid checked jacket, looked like he stole it off a horse or something, and huge tie, and he would be standing in front of the radar screen or weather map, and he'd be shimmering all over the place. That's a moire. I think that was a Dean Martin song too, but that's beside the point. So anyway, Nikon has chosen to get rid of that low-pass / anti-alias filter. Why? What's the benefit?
The benefit is increased detail and sharpness.
Really? So that's the claim.
Anti-alias filter, what it was designed to do was slightly soften everything so you did not get that moire pattern.
Right.
And certainly it's effective. It's not an issue most of us come across with our cameras.
Correct.
But it does cost detail and sharpness.
Right. And that's one of the things, when I teach the Lightroom workshops or the Elements workshops or the Photoshop workshops, and we talk about raw processing, the general consensus today is a raw file needs to be sharpened potentially at 3 points in the editing workflow. And it's like, 3 points? Well, one of them is what we call capture sharpening, that when you bring it into the raw converter, there's going to be an amount of sharpness that you apply to the entire file. Why is that? To overcome the effects of the low-pass / anti-alias filter. And a lot of people don't understand, and I see people showing a lot of pictures on the web, in portfolios as prints, that lack overall sharpness. And it is their inability to recognize that and don't know how or don't want to apply sharpening. They're thinking, it's got to come out of the camera. But they're not realizing that the camera is actually making their pictures less sharp for a technical reason. Film didn't need to do that because of the randomness of the grain pattern. These chemical clouds, what we called grain, were random, and therefore that moire pattern couldn't appear. And so we never had this issue with film. But with digital, because the pixels are all in a fixed pattern. And Fuji's actually one of the companies that has gotten around that. They're now making, and that's one of the things that the X100S has. Yep. It's their updated sensor called an X-Trans sensor, and
does not have the grid pattern.
Does not have a grid pattern, so they can do away with that low-pass filter on a point-and-shoot, basically. That's Fuji's claim. That's Fuji's claim, because they use a different pattern.
Right, absolutely.
So we've talked about this. So which camera is it that's on your list? Is it the D800, 800E, or do you have another one?
Oh, I have other cameras on my list.
But that's your list, the 800.
That was the first one.
Yeah, you like that camera.
I like that camera. I like 36 megapixels.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it kind of a little bit of a game changer. It's, and don't get me wrong. If I'm looking at a camera and one of them is 20 megapixels and the other one is 22 megapixels, I'm probably not going to see the difference.
Right.
But when I'm talking about going from something like a 16 megapixel camera or an 18 megapixel camera to 36 megapixels, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
You're now talking, image quality that used to be the realm of the $10,000 medium format camera at their cheapest.
Oh, sure. Well, I like the fact that you call the D800 a game changer, because that also conjures up some other images for me, which is, I wonder how many people, and I mean, we've got a lot of members in the group that have bought the D800. I don't know how many about the E, because it didn't come out right away at the beginning. Nikon had some, I don't want to call bugs, but obviously that part of the market was going to be the slightly lower price. I think they charge about $400 or $500.
Yeah, $3 or $4 for the E.
For the E, which
we'll
does
take
not
it
have
out,
the
but
low
charge
fast.
more.
That only makes sense. Welcome to Nikon. But when you say game changer, the thing that it conjures up for me is, it changed the game all right, because now that I'm dealing with these huge megapixel files, I'm going to need a new computer. I'm going to need more hard drives to store all my images on. And, and it's got to have more cores. It's got to be faster, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I need more RAM, too, because now with only 8 megs of RAM, so I'm going to have to buy a supercomputer with 32 megs of RAM, blah, blah, or gigs of RAM, excuse me. So I think a lot of people are enticed by that, but they don't think the whole flow through.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm not going to say that's not a cool camera or anything. I think it is. We've got some members that it really excited them about photography, and understandably so, because, for a few years, Nikon has been sort of at the bottom of the totem pole, struggling to get much over 12 megapixel. And then I think they really shocked most of the camera industry when they brought that D800 out. And I don't know if that's a Sony chip or a Toshiba chip, but I think Nikon's, except maybe on some smaller cameras, I don't think they produce any of their own chips anymore. I'll have to.
Well, they were at one time saying they were going into the CMOS business, but I can't honestly tell you that I know what's in what from them.
You can look that stuff up if you're really the techie gearheads. That's all really important to you, and so it is what it is. But that really is a unique camera. There's a lot of rumors what Canon might do and a few of the others, but time is dragging on, so we'll just have to see. I'll bypass one of my compacts because we're not running out of time, but we got a couple things to talk about. And this may shock a lot of people, but I've actually got one of the Nikons on my list of interchangeable lens cameras. This just was announced, about a month or so ago, the D7100.
Yep.
I thought the D7000 was a pretty cool camera when it came out. And the 7100 has effectively, as you pointed out this evening earlier when you and I were talking, their entire line now of interchangeables is 24 megapixel and up, basically. And that's pretty cool to have an entire lineup like that. 51-point autofocus system. It's still a crop sensor. And I think one of the most confusing things about this camera, though, Nikon's going to have to try to straighten out their marketing. You'd be surprised the number of members that have said to me, do you know that the D7100 has a 1.3x crop mode? And I go, no, it doesn't. And they go, well, it says so right there. What they don't realize is the camera is a 1.5 crop.
Yeah.
And it has a mode where you can crop in even more. It's effectively that digital crop that we were talking
about with digital zoom.
Yeah, with digital zoom, where it'll do another 1.3 on top of the 1.5, which basically gets it to about a 4/3 chip size. It's got, when you get to that mode, and their thought is, that'll increase the reach of the lenses, as we sometimes say. But even above and beyond, I think that's a kind of Mickey Mouse feature. They could have left it off. It's real confusing to people because some people are definitely believing they're getting something that they're not because they don't understand
what's happening,
the crop factors and things. But it is a very sophisticated crop sensor camera. And if I were looking now, it's probably. I don't know what the street price is, but it's probably a little over $1,000 or right in that $1,000 range. Yeah. And it is a great camera.
But did you know this? It doesn't have a low pass filter either.
Well, you were saying that, and I haven't really read that a lot. I'm going to have to look in it. Not that I would doubt you for any sense of imagination. But that would be cool, too, that on on a 24 megapixel camera, they've pulled off the anti-alias low pass filter.
And it's actually a different chip.
Right.
Than in the 3200 and 5200.
Yeah.
Lower line.
Right.
24 megapixel
introductory
cameras.
Level cameras. Yeah, it's right. It's got its own new chip to do some of this stuff. It's got all the basics. I think they upped the ISO a little bit over the 7000. I think ISO goes up to 25,000. Still, the screen size I think got bumped It's a little over 3. I think it's like 3.2, 3.3 inch. So they're actually getting a little bigger screen on it. The pixels, it's over 1 million pixel. So this is a camera that falls in between a couple of the Canon cameras. Doesn't really have a direct competitor in many respects. Canon has their what we call their XXD series, which was their 10D, 20D, 30D. And their current version, it's been out a couple years, it's the 60D, and we're kind of waiting for the 70D. And the 60D competed quite favorably against the 7000, but now with the 7100, it's really kicking butt on the Canon 60D. They need to release some cameras this year, and but it's still, while it's got a few features better than the Canon 7D, overall the 7D, I think there are a number of features and respects where the 7D is still what I would refer to as the crop, the king of the crop sensors. You look at 8 frames a second.
Oh, yeah.
The Nikon can't touch that. So for sports, for wildlife, it's nice to have 6 megapixels more, because the 7D from Canon is 18 megapixel versus 24, blah, blah, blah. It's now got a little higher ISO and some other things. But overall, for the kind of things that I shoot, which is wildlife, birds, things like that, if I had to pick between the two, I would go with the 7D, really.
And that is a great camera.
Yeah, the frame rate and everything else. And since I mentioned it, I'm not going to dwell on it a lot. I talked about some of the things that I like about it, but that's another one of my interchangeable picks is, I think from Nikon, it's the 7100. From Canon in the crop sensor, it's the 7D. And that's a wonderful camera. The price has been coming down on it. It is coming up on 4 years old, which is a real testament to how great that camera was 4 years ago, that it's still, in most of the features, it exceeds what the 7100 is doing. And but its replacement, which we don't know much about. These camera companies, they don't leak any specs. They don't put out a roadmap like chip manufacturers do and tell people where they're going. So we're kind of left when they're announced. But what's expected to be the 7D Mark II is, the rumors have this camera as a super camera. And I'll be honest, I'm saving my pennies for it. So when it comes out, we'll be talking about it on the show. Anything left on your list?
Well, one from one of the smaller manufacturers that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Which is Pentax.
Oh, another Pentax.
Pentax has a very interesting camera that has been out called a K5, and they now have a K5 II.
K5 II.
Mark II.
Yep.
And it's got some very interesting features.
Sure.
It's a 16-megapixel camera. It's not a real high-end camera, 24 megapixels or anything like that. But one of the things that they introduced is a couple of new exposure modes.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting. One is called SV, and the other is called TAV.
Okay.
In SV, you pick the ISO, and the camera sets the f-stop and shutter speed. So say I want to shoot this at ISO 400. It's done.
All right.
And in the other one, you set a shutter speed, or you set an ISO, and the camera just picks the f-stop and shutter speed.
Sure.
Which isn't too different than setting your own ISO and then shooting in program, maybe that one. But the other one's a little different. The other thing that it does that is kind of neat is it has capture focus.
All right.
So that you can kind of set the camera up, and when a subject comes into focus, the camera automatically fires.
Yeah. Nikon had that years ago when I owned a Nikon F5. Mm-hmm. It had, I think Nikon called it trap focus or something. And that was a really amazing feature for shooting some bird photography. That was pretty cool. not something you're going to use every day, but it's nice to have it in your arsenal, so to speak, of tools you can fall back on. And along with those odd exposure modes, there's one that, people say, oh, Jeff, you don't like Nikon and all this. But, I had a Nikon on my list. What more do you want? But this is something that Canon hasn't figured out yet. Maybe Pentax has. I'd have to look at their stuff a little closer. But several of the Nikons have a really cool manual mode feature. So you can, and this would persuade me to come out of aperture priority and actually start shooting manual again. You can, on some of the cameras, you can go into manual. So you're going to set your own shutter speed and you set your f-stop. And auto ISO, you'll be in auto ISO. So the ISO floats to make your exposure.
Yeah, that's what.
Right. But better than that, Nikon allows you to apply exposure compensation to your auto ISO. Yeah. Canon doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So when you try to do that with, for example, the 7D, which I just raved about, so it doesn't work. And, and not that I argue with people, but there are a lot of photographers that don't get the value of that. They go, well, it's in manual. If you want to adjust your exposure, then just change your shutter speed. And it's like, you don't get it.
Yeah.
What we want to be able to do is fix a specific shutter speed because I need to stop action, and I need a specific f-stop for enough depth of field. So I'm willing to deal with the noise factor of the ISO shifting, but since that's in automatic, I don't have a way to apply exposure compensation. Bingo. Nikon figured it out. You're telling me Pentax did. Yeah. That is a really great feature. Canon needs to figure it out because I don't think they have a single camera, even their 1DX. I don't think their 1DX implements that, if I remember correctly. That's just crazy. They just don't get it.
Now, there's another interesting thing about this Pentax.
Yeah.
It has an extremely quiet shutter.
Oh, yeah.
By hearsay, it's as quiet as a Leica M9.
Wow. Well, we got to have one of those. There's just no doubt about that. Well, that's cool. That's cool. Let's see. Looking at emails and things, we've got somebody emailed us about a topic last week. So I don't want to run out of time. We got a couple minutes. So last week we had talked about
accessories.
Film cameras.
Oh,
we talked about our favorite cameras. And you and I were trying to remember if anybody was still making film cameras. And actually several companies. Nikon has a couple of the FM10 and some version of it. Believe it or not, they're still making the F6.
Yep.
If you want to spend a couple of grand on a film camera. And somebody emailed us the Canon 1V, and then you could add the booster to make it the HS high speed. Canon still makes that camera, and probably because they have a factory full of them.
Yeah, right.
Nobody's buying them, so they may have them for another century. Yeah. So don't panic, people. There's film cameras out there. They'll be there forever because they made too many. So they'll write those down, and that'll be the end of it. But no. So, yeah, there are still some companies that are making film cameras, notably Nikon and Canon. But Nikon's got some introductory models. So if you're a diehard film fan, check out the Nikon stuff, and you can get yourself probably hooked up on that. Any last cameras that you want to share?
Well, there's some other things that I'd probably share that's new equipment besides cameras that I think's pretty cool. But, I don't know if you have any ideas on cameras that you'd...
Yeah, there's a couple on my list we can get to. One, because, as we touched on earlier, I probably should have brought this up earlier, Canon just announced this a couple weeks ago. It's in this country, it's known as the EOS Rebel T5i, which is building on their top-of-the-line Rebel system. in the rest of the world, when you read reviews, it's going to probably be called the Canon EOS 700D. Canon makes these different models, different parts of the world. But it is got some very cool features to it. It's an 18 megapixel APS-C camera. They've really upgraded the HD movie features, the autofocus of some of the lenses, live preview that you can actually preview some of the creative filters they've given you. So there's a new standard lens. It is a lens that has a new motor. It's called an STM lens.
Oh yeah.
And so what it's doing is it is a much quieter motor for the movie mode.
For the video.
Yeah, for doing video. And but one of the things I really like about this camera is and the T4i, its predecessor, brought it out. On the 3-inch screen on the back of it, it's all touch.
Yep.
And I think that's the wave of the future. We were talking before the show, and I firmly believe that even the high-end professional cameras, they will all be touch screens in certainly by the end of the decade, but I think much sooner than that.
Yeah, it could be.
You know, just as an aside, I've got a fellow there's a fellow that I follow. He's an active writer for about things related to Macintosh, and I follow him on Twitter. And he tweeted this probably about a year ago now, and he said, "Do you know what you call a magazine to a 2-year-old?"
No, I don't know.
It's a broken iPad. Because he, being a Mac user, his kid knows how to flip.
Yeah.
And go through the pad, and he touches pictures, and he knows the gestures to zoom in, zoom out. So you hand the kid a magazine, and what does he do? He tries to touch the pictures, make them zoom. A magazine's just a broken iPad. Doesn't do well from our brother that is a journalist and such, but and I think that's the wave of the future of virtually all these cameras. We're going to see them all go touchscreen a lot quicker than I think people think. And,
well, that could be.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages to be gained by the touch speed. And the last one that I have on my pick list, it's an upgrade of a camera that Teresa and I have had for several years. She and I both own a Canon PowerShot G12. Mm-hmm. And last fall, before the holidays, Canon announced the PowerShot G15. They skipped 13 because I guess 13's unlucky for Americans, and 14
it was a bad number for the Japanese.
Basically, yeah. So it jumped 3 model numbers. So now we're at the G15. Great camera. It's a very mature product. The G1 started the compact digital revolution. Still has raw capabilities and just a number of things. Has a lot of analog features that I like, buttons and dials as opposed to goofy menus. Has a my G12 has an articulated screen. Unfortunately, the G15, I think for some weatherproofing features that they kind of upgrade. I think I'll have to look into that. But for whatever reason, they did away with the folding articulated screen. But I think that's got to be on anybody's list that wants a great compact camera. And they upgraded the aperture. It's an f1.8 to 2.8 lens.
That's nice.
Yeah, a 1.8 lens on a compact, shooting raw. You can do some nice stuff. And I hear the music in the background, so I think it's time for us to end another Sunday night. We'll have some topics. Join us on Facebook at, what is it on Facebook? Facebook.com/Picture This Radio Show. Become a fan. Take our photography quiz coming up. Join us for a photo walk, and go out and take some pictures, folks. Have a great evening. See you, Lou.
Good night.